All right. Thank you, everyone, for trekking down to McCormick Place and joining us. It's great to be here with people who have helped expose Project 2025 from the beginning. My name is Joe Radosevich, VP for Campaigns at Center for American Progress Action Fund. It's the hat we're wearing this week. And it is an unexpected but delighted privilege to introduce my lieutenant governor, because I live in D.C., so I still get to be in Minnesota 100% of the time, Peggy Flanagan, to deliver our keynote remarks. And part of why we wanted to start today by talking about what's happened in Minnesota and the Minnesota miracle that I think a number of people in this room have read about is because we need something to sustain us as we get through the darkness of Project 2025. We need to think about what's at the other end of that tunnel. And there's sort of no one better to do that than Lieutenant Governor Flanagan. Personally, and then I'll stop talking about me, I remember Campus Camp Wellstone. I remember being a sophomore in high school and going, and that was a perfect approach and introduction to politics and thinking about something that Paul said, politics is about the improvement of people's lives. It's easy to just say that and then kind of move along. But you really think about that, and you think about being in Chicago, think about community organizers and how far they can rise and what that actually means, instead of a politics that is about taking control and putting people down, which is exactly what we have in Project 2025. And there's no better way to sort of contrast their vision for the future with what our vision for the future is, not just as like a Democratic Party, but as progressives, as community organizers, as people from all different backgrounds. So it is an honor to have LG Flanagan here, soon to be Governor Flanagan, with lots of work, to talk about what we are fighting for so we can get through the next 80 minutes and then 75 days of this election. So thank you. Let's give her a hand.
Thank you so much. Buju, Peggy Flanagan, addition Kaz, Gijuwe Damakwe, and to go Guabaga, Ganikagnin Junjaba, Mangendo Dame. My name is Peggy Flanagan. My English name is Peggy Flanagan. My Ojibwe name is Speaks with a Loud and Clear Voice Woman. I am a member, you can laugh. I'm a member of the White Earth Nation, which is the largest tribe in Minnesota and the best looking tribe in Minnesota. And my family is the Wolf Clan. And the role of our clan is to ensure that we're never leaving anyone behind, which is why I am here getting ready to elect this incredible team of Kamala Harris and Tim Walz. So today is a really big day for Minnesota. We are humble people, but we are very good at growing vice presidents. And so in the spirit of Hubert Humphrey and Walter Mondale, we will shortly have Tim Walz. And so I'm so grateful to the Center for American Progress for being really our partner throughout our time in office. And I know that, you were expecting Governor Walz originally. So the good news is that LG's, our whole job is just to be ready. That's literally it. And so I was happy to step in to this role today to tell y'all about some of the work we've been doing in Minnesota. But also, Joe, I'm so glad that you mentioned Paul Wellstone, because now is that moment for us to reflect on and think about Paul and everything that he taught us. I was a baby organizer on the 2002 campaign. I was going to be an early childhood special education teacher, and then I worked for Paul. And I saw that politics was a way for us to improve people's lives, the way that we can test for power around the things that we care about. And it truly changed my life. It's also why I met Tim Walz. He was my camper at Camp Wellstone. So I taught him everything he knows. But I think that truly is the legacy of planting these seeds of leadership and then watching them grow. So what we were able to do in Minnesota was tending to those seeds. And much of what we had been fighting for the last 20 years has come to fruition. And it's been very intentional, because those folks who have authored Project 2025, that is also very intentional. So in Minnesota, of course, we like to consider ourselves humble people, but today we're going to puff up, we're going to brag, because the DNC is just going to be one big Minnesota party. One reason, of course, that it's so exciting to be part of this is that my coworker has made it popular to call Republicans weird. It's so weird. They're so weird, but also dangerous. And we have to be clear. The complete obsession with controlling the bodies of women and of queer people, the march towards fascism with book banning and uncritical idol worship. Bless you, they want to be part of every single decision that you make. The most personal decisions. How and when and if to start a family, how to raise your own children, whether you can simply love and be publicly in love with your person. The Fringe has become the new center for today's Republican elected officials. And it's sad, and it's disappointing, and it's scary, and it's alarming to see. And yes, it's weird. I think we have something specific and special to share with the country, in addition to Tim Walz, and that is the story of the Minnesota Miracle 2.0. In many ways, I think that Minnesota over the last 2 years has set a blueprint for what our alternative vision should be to Project 2025. And that's necessary because in this election, we can't just scare people into voting. It's not a great tactic. I don't like using it on doors. I'd rather talk about our hopes and our dreams. And it's fun to canvass when you're the lieutenant governor. Because people are like, oh my gosh, what are you doing at my house? And I'm like, are you registered to vote? Let's go. We must also provide people with a vision of the positive ways that our party and our candidates will deliver for them when we are in power. And what I've seen happen in Minnesota and what we envision for people in every other state across this country takes a few ingredients. It takes a governing majority with an emphasis on governing. It takes a bold agenda that can rally our big tent, right, around these issues. And it takes leaders who will take risks, who will advocate, and who will also take folks with us. I know that there's some folks who say that, the things that we got done in Minnesota are impossible without a supermajority. But what I am going to tell you is that we got a whole bunch of stuff done with a 1-seat majority in the Senate. And And at 201 members, we have the 5th largest legislature in the country, but these margins were razor thin. But that brings me back to the ingredients, one of the most important ingredients, and that is a governing majority. And, our rallying cry is, what do we call a 1-seat majority? A majority. That's exactly right. But unlike trifectas of the past, of which a decade ago I was an advocate and the executive director of Children's Defense Fund, pushing our trifecta to do more for kids and families. And we heard a lot of things like, oh gosh, we don't want to do too much. We don't want to make people uncomfortable. Oh gosh, that's a little too far. And all we wanted to do was simply do the things we told people we were going to do. So a decade later, we're like, listen, y'all, we've got the keys to the car. A bunch of advocates were then the electeds on the inside. And we ran as hard and as fast as we could. We made sure that this time around, we were aligned around our core values. And for so many of the conversations that we had with faith and labor and nonprofit, with nonprofits and advocates, we had a lot of, can I see you in the kitchen? Conversations. Because fighting in public does not help anyone. It makes us look weak, and people are looking for a reason to divide us. So consistently coming back, trusting each other, having those hard conversations, and then refining these policies so that once we passed paid family and medical leave, we knew that it was the best possible version of that program that we could come up with. This allowed our administration and the legislature to remain focused on our bigger picture goals rather than being derailed by the details. The second important thing is the agenda. In Minnesota, we are lovers of split government. Not really. I like trifectas better. But so 2023 was the first time in 10 years that we had a unified government. And this made it really hard to take bold steps forward when we were divided, but it gave us time to tinker with those policies. Over that decade, we didn't cast these ideas to the side. We refined things like paid family and medical leave against a Republican brick wall, making the proposal a little stronger and a little better each time. So when the policy window was open, we didn't need to search for extra ideas. We knew exactly what to do. And forgive me if I start sounding like Billy Joel, but I believe it's important for us to do this list, and it's exhaustive because as progressives, we have to celebrate our victories because this work is hard. And when we win, we should get loud about it. So up to 20 weeks of paid medical leave, mandatory sick and safe time, ensuring access to abortion, IVF, and gender-affirming care, committing to and investing in reaching 100% clean energy by 2040, universal meals for all kids in school, no questions asked. As a kid with a different colored lunch ticket, that is a game changer. No cost attendance for Minnesotans from low-income families for state or community colleges, $1 billion investment in housing, re-enfranchising 50,000 voters in Minnesota, automatic voter registration and pre-registration for 16 and 17-year-olds, and a nation-leading child tax credit that will lower child poverty by a third. And I want to be clear, that is the short list. We did a lot more, and it's been kind of fun as we've gone through. I was like, oh my gosh, that passed. We got that done. We got to talk about it. But it's good news. And that's the agenda that led folks to ask if Governor Tim Walz was too progressive to be the vice president. And for those people who are asking, I have 2 points that I would like to make. First of all, it's the agenda that the legislature ran on and delivered legislative majorities for the first time in a decade. And it's the agenda that Governor Walz and I ran on and got us re-elected by almost 8 points. So that leads me to my second point, which is, what about this agenda is too progressive? When I look at this list of state policies, I see an agenda that is focused on serving the people of Minnesota and dedicated to maintaining a bright future for our young people in Minnesota. It's a positive vision for how we can create community where everyone just has what they need. So perhaps that agenda was not too progressive, but we've just lost sight of how far right Republicans have become. They've moved what the center is supposed to be. Access to basic resources like housing and food isn't radical, it's rational. Wanting a planet with clean air and water for our children isn't liberal, it's logical. And demanding control over our own bodies isn't extreme, it is the bare fucking minimum of what we should expect. Leader Driscoll, don't tell on me that I dropped the F-bomb. Which brings me where I can close on the third and final ingredient, which I like to call the beautiful coalition. Sometimes when I introduce myself, I share that I am the Lieutenant Governor. That's my job. But my vocation is as an organizer. Ever since I first walked into that Wellstone for Senate office in 2002, organizing has been my North Star. And as an organizer, I know that elected officials are important, but we are not enough. And in Minnesota, we have an embarrassment of riches when it comes to civic engagement. In Minnesota, I don't view what we did as having, done what we did as delivering for people as much as the fact that we delivered for each other. So thank you to labor and organizations like Isaiah and Unidos in Minnesota who dreamed with us and helped make a miracle a reality. So now we are here in 2024, collected at the DNC with an opportunity to dream and to deliver again. I know what Tim Walz and Kamala Harris care about. I saw AOC and Senator Warnock up on that stage, and I know that if we dig in and deliver for each other in November, that means the House, the Senate, and the White House. Not only will we not put Project 2025 directly in the trash, we will put ourselves back on track for the positive vision of the country that we all deserve. So thank you to CAP for the work that you do every day, literally putting together the roadmap. We have learned from y'all. We have worked together to craft these policies that are good for working people. And when I say I take this personally, I grew up in the community of St. Louis Park, which is a first-rank suburb of Minneapolis. My mom moved us there using a Section 8 housing voucher. We relied on programs like free and reduced price lunch, SNAP, which back in the day we called food stamps. Medical assistance is why I am standing here alive in front of you today. And the child care assistance program allowed my mom to go back to school and lift our family into the middle class. So I know what these investments can mean. And I know that there are little girls all across the country who just need a chance and an opportunity. When I was little, I wanted to grow up to become a ballerina nurse, which is exactly what it sounds like. But because of these investments that my community, that Minnesota made in me, I'm the Lieutenant Governor of the greatest state in the entire nation. And this is what we are talking about. These dreams of young people all across the country. It is worth doing the work and being strategic and being clear about our role and our vocation. Our occupation, sure, that matters. Our titles as we walk around this convention or in DC or back in the capitals in our states. But what really matters is what our vocation is if we are going to beat back Project 2025. Because I want to know what you lose track of time doing. What feeds you, what fuels that fire in your belly that you will not stop, because we have work to do. They have been playing the long game, so have we. And it is time to push back once and for all, to say we are not going back, we are not living that way, we are only going forward. Thank you.
Thanks. Thank you so much to Governor-to-be of Minnesota, Peggy Flanagan. And off she goes. My name is Navin Nayak. I'm the president of the Center for American Progress Action Fund. And I'm just going to take 2 minutes as a transition to set up the rest of our session. We initially, as Joe had mentioned, really had this event focused on the threat
of what MAGA extremists and Republicans were planning to do, but couldn't really allow ourselves to spend the entire time focused on the threat. And so we're really pleased to have Lieutenant Governor Flanagan set up the conversation to make sure that we are always talking about an affirmative vision, that we are always talking about what we are for, and not letting ourselves only try to scare people to the polls. As important as that is going to be, and you'll hear, there are real risks for the American people that we do have to put in front and center. But was really valuable to take a few minutes there to hear not only what was possible in Minnesota, and when Democrats do lead with a vision that puts people first and trying to actually solve real problems that communities are facing. We are not going to be that hopeful for the rest of this session necessarily, but we think it's really important as we pivot here to make sure that we are talking about what the American people have to lose as well. There are two sides to this conversation, and I think everyone is very excited by what Vice President Harris and Governor Walz are offering the American people in terms of a new way forward and how we can actually address a lot of the concerns our communities are facing. But at the same time, we have to make sure that the American people understand that there's a choice on the ballot, and that these choices will affect their lives very directly. So for the next two sessions, we're going to invite Senator Murphy in a few minutes to come have a conversation about Project 2025 and what those threats are. And then we're excited to actually we've pulled together a phenomenal panel as well to really dig into how activist organizations, how the public is understanding this issue, and all of the ways in which we are trying to communicate to the American people what is really at stake for them in this election. And so I'm not sure if our CEO is here yet. He is not yet. I might just, Diane? No. Okay. I'm going to go ahead because we are going to lose Senator Murphy in a few minutes. And so let me take a second just to introduce him here. I feel like we could be talking to Senator Murphy about too many topics right now. As folks obviously know, he has been a leader on gun violence for more than a decade, and really the leading moral voice in the party on these issues. But he has also been a leader pushing our party to solve a lot of other problems and to grapple with issues that are affecting families, children, communities in many other ways. And we're really excited today to dig in because he's also one of our best communicators on what the other side is offering and what the threats are there. And so, Senator, I'm going to invite you up because we're excited to have this conversation with you.
They Patrick's actually around the stone.
He's coming. Okay, I'm going to let him know. Here's what I'm going to do out of personal privilege.
Yeah.
Before we get to Project 2025, I'm going to take a personal privilege.
Go for it. You have the microphone. You can do whatever you want with it.
There was a fantastic.
Who's going to stop you?
There was a fantastic profile of you this week in the New York Times.
Right.
About much bigger challenges, and we are going to spend the rest of the time with you talking about, what the threat is. But you're grappling with much bigger challenges that I think families are dealing with around the country. So I wanted to just take a minute to, how do you see, there's an election in 76 days. That's obviously front of mind in terms of making sure we don't go down the wrong path. But you're also grappling with much bigger challenges. And I'm curious, how does that start to fit into the story we should all be telling in what the future and the new way forward looks like?
Well, great to be with you, and thanks for having me. Looking forward to having this very important conversation about Project 2025 and this mandate that we have to be constantly engaged in comparative politics, right? We got to tell our story, but we got to tell their story too, right? Because it's a dangerous, losing story. This was this is a profile the New York Times has been working on for like a year and a half. It's kind of a strange week to drop it, but
I wonder why.
It speaks to, I think, a really long-term project for us as a movement. About 2 years ago, I started digging into the new right, to people like J.D. Vance and Curtis Yarvin and Josh Hawley and some of the intellectual, quote unquote, leaders that the Claremont Institute that they rely on. And what I found was that the right was having a really interesting but dangerous conversation about some really deep metaphysical issues that are at the heart of the American crisis, right? We are sort of losing our easy access to positive identity and meaning because of a whole host of things that have changed in this country in a short period of time. And the right is engaged in understanding that, offering really irresponsible solutions. Part of it, most of it, is just kind of dialing back societal changes 100 years so that the people who have lost power get it back. But that crisis of identity that people are having, in particular men, but many others as well, is something we have to talk about as a party as well, right? There's a lot of big things that have happened very quickly, right? The rise of women in the workplace, the massive walk away from religious affiliation, the erasure of local unique places, right? That used to be a big part of your identity structure. Work as a source of pride, right? When people work for local companies rather than big multinational companies. So, I have been engaged in this conversation about, what policy can do to help people regain positive identity, positive meaning, and positive connection, because that's the other thing we've lost is connection to each other. 20 years ago, only 2% Americans reported having no friends. Today, 15 to 20% of Americans report having no friends, zero, right? And this is a crisis of loneliness and disconnection layered on top this crisis of meaning and identity. So this piece was about this longer term project that I think stands in front of the left, which is to not go straight to policy, right? To actually spend a little bit of time diagnosing how people are feeling, what is actually in their gut when they wake up every day. What are they anxious about? What are they angry about? Listen to that, not just in blue districts and blue states, but in red states as well, and then craft the policy after you've done that sort of emotional inventory of the country. And I think the right has at times done that better than us, and that's what this New York Times piece is kind of hinting at the work we have to come.
Well, I'm gonna keep going with you and maybe pivot to Project 2025. How do you think that, this is an ambitious 900-page document they've put together to take over control of government. How does that fit in this story? Is it responsive in your mind to, some of the things people are craving, or, what in there stands out to you as the things that we need to lift up that people may not know about in terms of threats?
Yeah, I mean, there is a broader connection, and then if you go sort of into the details of Project 2025, there are some more granular level connections. I think broadly, when people are in a place where they wake up every day and are not sure of their purpose, there's a sense of hopelessness, and then very quickly on top of that, a sense of anger, right? And you feel that in the country today. You feel that sense of anger and anxiety. And so the quickest way to deal with that politically is to just tell you who you should be angry at. And the right, for the last 30 years, has kind of become a one-trick pony. They hate the government, right? The government is the source of your problems. And obviously in a democracy that's pretty inefficient, there's lots of evidence as to why the government is not working very well to solve your problem. And so Project 2025 at its heart is just an extension of the right-wing grievance machine, right? It's these deep state secret bureaucrats that are ruining your life. And the answer to your trouble is to just destroy loads of government, because government is bad and it's hurting you, and to sort of rip out from government the people that you don't know but exist that are your enemy. Underneath it, there are some, maybe more interesting through lines. One of the things people feel today, for instance, is a lack of control, right? They feel like they have lost control of their life. Parents in particular feel like they've lost a lot of control over their kids' lives as their kids are addicted to screens and they can save for college, but it just doesn't seem to matter. So there's a lot of that in Project 2025, right? So the education chapter of Project 2025 is all about parents' rights, all about vouchers, right? All about this idea that we are going to give parents more tools, and it's all fake. It's not real control, but we're going to give parents more control, and that speaks to this thing that parents are feeling, that I can't make my kid's life better. I can't improve their circumstances in the way that I thought my parents could improve my circumstances. And so inside the document, some of the most irresponsible parts, like the mandate to turn our education system into a universal voucher program, are actually an effort to speak to some of those things that folks are feeling out there that aren't so great.
Well, let's dig into that, because you gave a specific example, and I do think one of the challenges that kind of lies ahead of us here is being able to communicate what this 900-page document, what this plan to take over the government would actually mean for people's daily lives. Because if we're not able to communicate, to your point, in a way that speaks to their gut, we might not actually, help them understand what's actually a risk for them personally. So how do you, like maybe the example of education, or feel free to take a few other examples as you think about Project 2025 that you think are really important for us to communicate to the American people in a way that's going to matter to them?
So, I mean, here's, I guess, how I think of Project 2025, right? The Republican Party's positions have become, over time, wildly unpopular. Their positions, whether it be on tax policy, more tax cuts for the rich, on violence policy, right? Get rid of the protections, hand more money to the gun lobby, their position on choice, are all wildly out of the mainstream. And they know it. Right? They know it. And that's in part why over the last few years they wanted to sort of put more power in the court system where they could control rather than in the majoritarian bodies. But they know that they have one more chance. And the next time they win, right, they need to break democracy, hold power forever, because once people see what they're for, they'll never win again. Right? So Project 2025 at its heart is an effort to end democracy so that the voters never, ever get another chance to vote on their irresponsible policies, and to end the system of checks and balances that would protect us from a lot of the stuff they want to do that's blatantly unconstitutional. So they are planning to win power and then seize power, so that none of us have the ability to deliver a referendum on their radical run to the right when they get power. And I mean, I'll read it now because I just looked it up this morning. I mean, so this is this is J.D. Vance a couple of years ago, and this is just you have to get a sense of what they're trying to do here. He says, "I think that we should seize the institutions of the left and turn them against the left. We need a de-Bathification program," right? He says, "I think we should fire 10,000 middle-level bureaucrats, and when the courts stop you, Donald Trump should stand up before the country and say the Chief Justice has made his ruling. Now let him enforce it." Right? That's what they're talking about, right? They are talking about breaking the rule of law. They are talking about ignoring a court ruling that tells them that they can't do things and just trusting that law enforcement and the military won't enforce the law. That's what this is about. It's a destruction of rules, of the rule of law, of democratic norms, and democracy itself.
I think that's incredibly well put. And I think to some, two things I want to get into. One, to some, it's sort of astounding that they are being so public about this open anti-democratic effort, and at the same time we have seen, and we'll hear about more about this from the panel, an actual response from the public as they've heard more about this. I think there's a lot more work to do, but I'm curious both to get your perspective as a legislator working with some of these other folks. Do you think they are all on board with this approach, that really this is an anti-democratic effort and this is sort of their push to strip away any sort of public input through elected officials? And how do we make sure, on the flip side of that, that the rest of the American people really understand that that is actually what they're signaling. That, J.D. Vance has made that statement now on public television multiple times, basically saying that we don't care. Donald Trump should not care what the courts say, and we should absolutely, make them. We're gonna defy the courts if we have to in order to advance our agenda. I don't know how much of that has actually trickled out to the American people. So I'm curious to get your thoughts on both from the legislator's perspective and then sort of how do we get better at communicating this public.
Well, I think the answer is easy when it comes to where the Republican Congress is. They will do anything he tells them to do. Period. Stop. Right. I mean, this is not a political party. I mean, I know we say it over and over again, but it is absolutely a cult of personality. I mean, I spent 5 months writing that bipartisan border bill. I swear to you, on Sunday afternoon, minutes before we released it, we had 20 Republican votes. I mean, some of the top Republican leaders were whipping for the thing on Sunday morning. And then Sunday night, Stephen Miller tweets were against it. And Monday morning, they vanished, right? They were all gone, every single vote, right? They took their instructions, and within 24 hours, they had done what they were told. So when it comes to, these really radical plans to, ignore the courts, for instance, they will take their instructions and offer no resistance, just as they have over and over again. But the public, listen, the public is definitely having a conversation with itself over the efficacy of democracy. Let's not pretend that isn't happening. Folks have not seen democracy delivering for anybody except the elites for 20 to 30 years. And so they are definitely open to other offers, but they're not ready to give up on it in 2024 and not overnight. So the plan to the American public, if we let them know about it, is deeply, deeply scary, not just because they don't want to give up on democracy, but also because they still believe that the legislature should decide whether abortion is legal or illegal. And Project 2025 said, we don't care. We're going to go back and take this 60s, 70s, 80s era law, the Comstock Act, regardless of whether we can pass an abortion ban through Congress. And we're going to use that to effectively ban abortion across the country. And that definitely sounds super distasteful to a bigger cross-section of the American public than just those who say that they are for free and safe legal abortions. They don't think that that's how that decision should be made. And we just got to do a better job of explaining it.
And do you think that part, sort of pushing on that a little bit, the abortion one is obviously one of the most salient things. I'm curious, part of what that gets to is also our ability to speak to the other side actually taking even more agency away from people. At a time when people don't feel a lot of control over their lives, along comes Project 2025 and this MAGA agenda, and it is all about centering even more power and control in a few people and even giving the American people less control. What about on the economic front? We know that is, a source of where people feel even less agency and less control. How do we communicate on those issues around what the right is really offering them or not offering them?
And Project 2025 just offers you up proof of concept, which is that if they get control of government, they are interested in one economic policy and one economic policy only, which is handing more tax breaks and more benefits to Donald Trump's Mar-a-Lago friends, right? That's it. That's the beginning and end of their economic policy, is massive tax breaks for Trump's billionaire buddies. And that's what Project 2025 essentially says. The tax code section of Project 2025 is another massive tax cut, a state tax cut, a gift tax cut, a capital gains tax cut. It is just a doubling down of what they did in their first term. Also, Project 2025 talks about the massive privatization of essential functions of government, including the Department of Education, right? The idea for vouchers is that they would be able to go to private schools as well as public schools. And the document calls for the effective privatization of the VA. All of that is just a mechanism to enrich that same Mar-a-Lago crowd, right? That's the business Betsy DeVos is involved in, right? She's at Mar-a-Lago regularly. What is she asking for? The privatization of education dollars so that I can get rich off your kids' education. People really don't like that either, right? They don't want the wholesale purchase of government by Trump's rich billionaire crowd. So the combination of those two, the privatization of government into the hands of Trump's billionaire crowd and the emphasis once again on tax cuts for that group is just toxic for them. It's toxic, and they wrote it all down, which is like insane.
An opportunity to challenge for us.
Yes.
Yeah. I know you have hard in a few minutes, so maybe you are speaking tonight. I don't know if
I am
spoiling it. Very excited.
Thank you.
I would sort of want to give you an opportunity to close out here, either in sort of sharing some of what you might share tonight, but the challenge ahead of us is in these elections always both make sure the American people understand what they have to lose, how things could get worse. But we face a challenge at a time when people are questioning democracy, are questioning the role of government. How do we instill a sense of confidence and trust in what we're offering? I don't know if that's what you're going to speak about tonight, but I'd love for you to, kind of share your thoughts on how to message that.
Yeah. I don't know that I'm supposed to share what I'm speaking about tonight. So, but I mean, let me say this. I mean, you and I have talked a lot about this, right? I am often the guy at the Democratic caucus that meets on Tuesday afternoon and raises my hand and says, listen, whenever we are talking about any topic, you got to start by explaining what Republicans are for, right? We have to take advantage of the fact that they are for the most unpopular agenda of any mainstream political party running in a presidential election year in our history, right? That is really unfortunate. It's really dangerous for the country, but it is a gift for those of us that want to make sure Donald Trump never gets in the White House. So you have to constantly be doing comparative politics. Now, that can be a labor, right? Because as you sort of said it from the podium, this is going to be sort of the downer section of the afternoon, right? But I think that comparative politics is made so much easier by what is happening in our party right now, because there is just a natural sense of joy that exists as all of these new people are coming out, and you can hear the way that Kamala and Tim and others are, and even the Obamas last night, are punching harder. But when you do it in a sort of room and a movement filled with joy, right, it's a little bit easier to say, and it's also a little bit easier to hear. So it's kind of an invitation, frankly, to do more of it. So maybe what you will hear me say tonight is that on one particular topic that tends to be a massive liability for our party, the border, we have an opportunity to explain what the Republican Party is actually for. They have given us another gift. Project 2025 is one gift, but their destruction, their annihilation of the bipartisan border bill, because Donald Trump told them, keep the border a mess because that's better for me politically, is the best juxtaposition between us for the bipartisan border bill, sincere about solving the problem, not believing we have to make a choice between a secure border and celebrating being a nation of immigrants, and their position, keep the border a mess because we have no idea what we would do with our time if we couldn't complain about the border, right? That contrast is a really important one. And just like we have to get a little bit more comfortable regularly talking about what Republicans are for, we also have to get a little bit more comfortable being on topics that we aren't naturally comfortable with, but that voters have told us they care about, like what's happening at the border, and that may or may not be what I'm talking about tonight.
Listen, Senator Murphy, it's always a pleasure. I really do think you're a model for both making sure we communicate effectively about what's at stake, but also grapple with the things that the American people are really struggling with and not take the easy road. So thank you for sharing your thoughts.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Thanks, bud.
So back tonight.
Yeah, thanks.
Fantastic. And we're going to transition to a panel conversation. And so I'm going to introduce our fantastic moderator for this panel. I'll take that down your way. For folks who don't know, Jamal Simmons has been a political operative at the highest levels in so many forms, both at presidential level, in both the Clinton, Gore, and other campaigns, on a chief of staff in Congress, and most recently as the vice president's communications director in the White House. And I really did think that Doug Emhoff's reference to the vice president captures him so well. He really is such a joyful warrior. For folks who see him on cable news, he's out there, one of our most effective communicators in the party, but always doing it with a smile. So I want to welcome Jamal up. Thank you. All right, thank you.
Hey, everybody. Good to see everybody. I'm not sure which one of these is on. I'll take this one for a second and then invite up the panel. I'm not going to take offense at everybody leaving, but I do want to ask, anybody here from Project Veritas? Anybody? Raise your hand if you are. Turning Point USA, is Charlie Kirkson, anybody here? No? Nobody's going to admit it. If you are here, welcome. We're not ashamed. So I'm going to bring up our panel. We had one change to the program just because time got away from us a little bit. So we are not going to have Representative Fintrice Driscoll from Florida, the House Minority Leader. She will not be here. She has to take off. But we are going to have my friend Jefrey Pollock, who is here. If Jeff wants to come up when he's done talking to Patrick, he's welcome to come to the stage. And then Yasmin Radjy, where are you? Yasmin, yeah, join us.
Oh, you're here.
I'm going to move over so I can sit. I'm going to sit with the people. Man of the people.
Mic in my
Yes.
a mic in my tush. Okay. Okay. That's the voice.
All right. This is weird, huh?
Don't spill.
Be careful.
Look at that.
I brought a Diet Coke. We're okay.
All right. So obviously we've been hearing about Project 2025. We're going to talk a little bit more about it in this panel with a couple of folks who know a lot about it. Now, Yasmin's with Swing Left, and so thank you because you guys are doing a lot of grassroots organizing all over the country. And when we flip this House and keep this Senate and keep this White House, we're going to owe you guys a great debt of gratitude. And then Jeff, who is at Global Strategy Group, and they have been figuring out ways to talk to and about progressive politics, democratic politics, talking about members and political leaders up and down the ballot, and keeping us in good shape around the country. I want to thank you also for your work. So thank you to both of these folks for their work that they're doing on behalf of Democrats and progressives around the country. Can we get a round of applause for our panel? And then lastly, I just want to say thank you to the people at Cap Action for having me back. Apparently I didn't mess up too badly the last time I did something for them, so I want to thank them. Yeah, it's always hope for internal. And then let's get started with Project 2025. So Jeff, I want you to kind of set us up a little bit and talk about what Project 2025 means to the voters.
Yeah.
What do they know about it? And it feels like they know an awful lot more because I've got a 40-year-old cousin who does hair and nails.
Yeah. Yeah.
Who has been asking me since the lieutenant governor did it, what the hell's going on with what's going on with Project 2025? What's that about?
Yeah.
How do we stop it? So
well, it's interesting, right? Normal people are talking about it, right? Normal people is literally nobody here in this room, right? So let me tell you what's happened with Project 2025 from a data perspective that I think is fascinating. And I do want to give a shout out to Navin Nayak and Patrick Gaspard at CAP, who have been critical components and pieces and advisors to Navigator Research. And for all of you who don't know, you can go to navigatorresearch.org right now. You can sign up for our emails. You'll get them every week or 2 weeks, depending on how we're doing research. And that is all, these are all questions that are meant to help, as Jamal just said, guide the democratic ecosphere on how to talk about things. And Project 2025 is one of those things that we've actually been looking at for a while. It was May, June, I think, that we first looked at it. And like 10% of the voters said they were favorable to Project 2025. 10% of the voters said they were unfavorable. And at least half the voters were lying about both sides, right? Nobody knew what that was. Today, the numbers have moved unbelievably quickly. And this is kudos to the Biden campaign, then the Harris campaign, that has driven a narrative about Project 2025, and thus the negatives on 2025 have skyrocketed. We're talking about now 60%, 70% of voters now say that they know what Project 2025 is and are far more unfavorable than favorable. The movement has, of course, been driven by Democrats. Well, that's great, but doesn't help us, right? But a lot of the movement has also been driven by independents. So that's a good thing. But I want to give one warning about the Project 2025, and that is what that hairdressing nail stylist that you just talked about, which is they actually still don't know what it is. They know it's bad.
They know it's bad.
But they don't know what it is. And so to me, the convention, for example, which is the kickoff of this entire conversation, every night you've already seen them talking a little bit about it. You're going to hear more tonight. I've seen the speeches. You're going to see more tomorrow night. And I think the narrative of what Project 2025 is and is about, you're going to see for the next 80 days because it's critical that the voters actually don't just think it's something amorphous, but that it is a real plot agenda of Donald Trump.
That's good. And so what is it? You said they don't really know about
Yeah.
it. But what do they know?
They know it's something bad. They know that it's something that the Republicans are planning. They link it to Donald Trump. Donald Trump is running away from it as fast as he can, trying to say, no, it's not me. It's sort of hard to say it's not you. It's a 900-page document. Your name appears in it 300 times. All of your top advisors and people who everyone knows are going to be a part of your White House, if God forbid you win, are the authors of this report. So like bullshit, we're not going to let you get away with it. But what we need voters to understand, and I'm going to give you specific language. I'm looking at my laptop so I don't mess it up, right? Project 2025, we have to talk about the how, the what, the who, and the why. The how, right? It's a takeover. It's an agenda. It's a plot. Any of those words. The what is the impacts. The impacts are threatening rights and freedoms, hurting the middle class, threatening democracy. The who, the villains, Trump, his loyalists, wealthy billionaire donors, MAGA, Republicans, and the why, because they're dangerous, power-hungry, and extreme. So think about that in more English than I just said. Project 2025 is a plot that threatens rights and freedoms, hurts the middle class, threatens democracy, led by Donald Trump and his loyalists, because they are dangerous, power-hungry, and extreme. That's the language that we need people to understand. There are specific pieces of it as well that you have already heard about again in the last two nights of speeches at the convention. I keep coming back to that because maybe there's been some research to figure out what people are bothered by, right? Hypothetically. And what people are bothered by is stopping overtime pay, which Project 2025 details. It's monitoring pregnancies, which freaks people out. It's the next iteration of talking about a national abortion ban. It's eliminating the protections for pre-existing conditions, ending drug price negotiation, cutting Medicare and Social Security. Those are the most powerful elements of Project 2025. And we need people to understand, as was discussed before, as Senator Murphy just said, they fucking wrote it down. Like, it's a book, a massive book, 900 pages to talk about it. So, like, we can point to it and be very clear that this is what they are looking for.
So, Yasmin, as you guys are organizing around the country, are you starting to hear this at all from the people that you're talking to? And what is it that you're getting back from them as you guys are knocking doors or making phone calls?
First of all, it's not fun being on a panel with Jeff because I usually just quote Navigator research, so I have to come up with more original thoughts. But I agree, everyone here should read the Navigator polling. It is useful and also digestible, which is why Jeff's work is so important.
Thank you.
I think for us, there's two phenomena. One is the base of at Swing Left, we organize volunteers and donors to channel their energy into the most impactful races, from the presidential all the way down to state legislative races. And our volunteers and our donors have been fired up about Project 2025 from the beginning. I learned about Project 2025 from our volunteers because they were starting to organize panels in their local groups because of how angry they were about the extremism. But so that, our every email that we send about Project 2025 raises 170% more in grassroots contributions than ones about other topics that also really matter and really motivate people. So the base is there. I think, our orienting philosophy is that we work only in purple turf, thus the outfit. But the biggest divide that we see is not the red blue divide. It is the people who pay attention to politics and the people who don't. So the canvassing conversations that our folks are having are with Republican voters, with independent voters, with light blue voters. And there, as Jeff said, there is more and more knowledge of Project 2025. But there's also, because it's a lot of folks who are not paying that close of attention, there's not I know a lot and I'm going to ask you about it. It's I know I should know something, so I'm not going to ask any questions. And so the guidance that we always give, irrespective of the cycle, to our canvassers is to ask a lot of questions and to listen in order to be able to have a persuasive conversation. And the more that we sort of like get into the specific issues, voters are there, the data is there, the gap is the believability gap. And Jeff has great numbers on this, but people are on our side, including Republicans, including independents. When they hear about this, it's extreme. They just don't believe that this could be real.
Yeah.
And so I think something that's been really important for us is to go back and look at the first Trump administration, because this is not, I mean, we all know this as the part of the country that pays too much attention to politics, not the majority who don't. Like, a lot of the stuff in there, my favorite that Jeff didn't mention, but my favorites are on that list, but the National Weather Service, like it is bananas to say, rather than give people the non-political information of a hurricane is coming and you should evacuate your house, or here's a wildfire and here's how people are going to, get you out of your house. That is the most apolitical possible thing. And this is not like it came out of nowhere. Donald Trump chose the CEO of AccuWeather, who wanted to privatize the weather service the first go around. So like the groundwork is all there. And I think the more that we anchor the conversations to get to that believability gap on, this is what's already happened, and this is how it's going to be better and more effective for their side in dismantling our government. And the more that's like rooted in specific, as Jeff said, issues rather than Project 2025, which maybe you haven't heard of, or if you have, you're maybe embarrassed to ask about.
So a few months ago at an awards show on television, Taraji Henson, the actress, got up and said, find out about Project 2025. And reports were after that there was a surge in question asking about this. And if you go on, Instagram and TikTok and follow you see a lot of discussion among people about Project 2025. So I'm wondering, as you guys are engaging, whether it's with donors or it's with the canvassers, are you seeing sort of community leaders or the kind of validators?
Yeah.
Are they getting more interested in it and pushing more? Is that what's happening and driving some of it?
Yes. So one mistake that we collectively made as a movement and we as an organization did, we kept telling people Google it. And then we Googled it ourselves and we're like, oh, when you Google it, it goes to the 900-page document on the Heritage Foundation's website. So organizations like Cap Action and others have done a really good job of updating the Google search so that you get the simple information about it. But there is the two requests that we've gotten consistently are, what do I say at the door, right? Like canvassers are really smart, are really motivated, and are also perfectionists often. And so we're like, I'm not an economist. I don't know how to talk about prescription drug prices and what this would mean. And so the really simple sort of one-page fact sheet to talk to people about is what a lot of community leaders are asking for. And two is the two issues that every single canvas, when we do a survey of what's coming up on the doors, every canvas, almost every conversation is either about abortion or it's about the economy or it's about both, right? There's really no other issues that are coming up. And the economy is big, right? So that includes drug prices. It includes, people who've had extreme weather events who are worried about the cost of their homes or whatever the case may be. But what they want is, how do I talk about Project 2025 as it relates to those issues in a way that I don't feel like I need to memorize a script? And so that's what we're providing them with, what many organizations that are represented here are helping with, so that the barrier to entry feels lower for volunteers who don't have the brilliance of a Jeff Pollock brain of knowing all the polling information and exactly how to message every issue.
So Jeff, Yasmin mentioned a point that people don't necessarily know that it's that it's going to actually happen. So tell me how you guys interpret that and what you want to do with that.
So, and look, Yasmin does brilliant work, and the organization is critical to winning. And the notion of, knocking on doors to me is one of those things that I can you imagine sending me out to talk to voters? I mean, they would despise me. So I think that what she said is 100% right, and we find it in the data, which is that when you tell people these things, they say, no, can't happen, can't possibly happen. By the way, that's also what they told us for years about Roe. For years, we would sit in focus groups with voters and say, they're going to get to Washington and repeal a woman's right to choose, and they'd be like, bullshit, it's not going to happen. And so we actually have tangible proof of it happening, right? Something they all thought was not. So that the one thing we can go back to is to point to Roe, and we know that that's something that's in our favor, obviously terrible for women, but in our favor politically to talk about. The second thing, though, is the document. And it is what makes it different, right? There is something here that we can point to. It's not just amorphous people saying it. It's not just random stuff. It's written down by senior leaders. So we've tested this. For example, a majority of black, brown, white voters all believe that at this point, all believe Project 2025 is what Donald Trump stands for, is his agenda. And so we've already gotten a part of the way there. But showing the proof, showing the language, showing the research that says, like, don't take our word, look at page 364, I think is important to showing the reality of what these guys intend to do.
So one of the questions that comes up around Project 2025, obviously it wants to eliminate all these DEI programs.
Yeah.
And particularly looking at, anybody who's funding DEI programs, sort of defunding these agencies that have these issues put in place. So, I grew up in a family where a lot of people work in government, like a lot of African-American families. Number one employer of African-Americans in this country is the public sector, state, local, and federal. These are middle-class jobs.
Yeah.
Right? These are jobs that pay $55,000, $60,000, $75,000 a year, $100,000 a year for people. So if you stop companies from being able to have any kind of affirmative program to hire people and include them, and then you start firing government middle managers, many of whom are African-American, I mean, this feels a little like maybe they don't like us. Is that a fair interpretation of the program?
I'm not here to talk about black jobs, Jamal. I think that is fair. The data and what Yasmin said, by the way, about the National Weather Service, it's true. Like, if you look at the research, it's true. It actually is one of the things the most persuasive, because I don't mention it because it's just so weird. I'm not supposed to use the weird word, but it's just like, what? Along with banning the Department of Education. What I would point to about that in particular, there's two things. Not the sort of overall DEI part, which is a mixed conversation, as we all know. But there are pieces of Project 2025 that really do bother people. For example, the notion that they are they're saying teachers shouldn't be able to teach about slavery, for example, or black history. That is persuasive to people who are suburban swing voters who are like, that just doesn't make any sense to me, right? That's it's prescriptive about education, which bothers them to begin with, but also it's like, come on, guys, we can be real, we can have a real conversation. So I would prefer to have that conversation. The second piece, though, about the jobs in government is another piece of Project 2025. I don't want to forget two things that are in there. Number one, Donald Trump weaponizing the Department of Justice, basically taking it over with his own people and using it to do as he wants. A lot of folks I know, black, brown, who think that that's highly problematic. And then, of course, purging the civil service of people who are not loyalists, which is firing people from those middle-class jobs that you're talking about. Those, I think, are impactful at a broad level, and I think would get to that black middle-class family that you're talking about if I was knocking on that door trying to talk about a concern they might have.
Just on this last point, I think it's 40 or 50,000 jobs that would be eliminated overnight. And as a resident of the District of Columbia who listens to a lot of local and regional news, like, Virginia Republican electeds are freaking out, right? Because this is someone who has a job, maybe working at the FBI, maybe working with a government contract. Like, they are really worried about the economic impact. And so to me, it's sort of like the whole Republican Party, as the senator said earlier, is just sort of like, where is the wind blowing with Donald Trump, and let's follow it. But I think where we're going to see a lot of the freak out about the job impact is in the states where there's a lot of federal service jobs, and we're already seeing it in the sort of like backing away of Virginia leaders in particular. I know that's like now kind of a blue state, but I'm excited to see them try to defend that aspect of Project 2025 and fail.
The number one thing, by the way, on that, on the some of those policy proposals that bothers people is eliminating Head Start, which is also in Project 2025. Talk about something that allows lower middle class families to get that start, kids to get a start in their education process. That is something that, again, people say, why on earth would we do something like that?
Yeah, so the minority leader had to take off, but one of the things that you talked about having proof points, some of these things aren't hypothetical anymore. We're starting to see Florida as a test case for some of these ideas being rolled out. And Yasmin, I'm wondering, I'll start with you. In any of your work, are people in states like Florida or in southern states where they're paying attention, are they freaked out about what's happening with their government?
Yeah, I mean, to me, one of the polls that has been the most grounding over these past few years is before the elimination of Roe was when the 6-week ban in South Carolina was passed. There was a poll that Jeff probably ran. I don't remember. But there was a poll asking what people's sense of that policy was. And it was like 80% opposed. I mean, a 6-week ban is wild. But then the same poll asked, have you heard that there was a 6-week ban in our state? And it was about the same number of people who said, oh, I didn't know that happened. And so I think a lot of what the Republican bet is in the long game that was referred to earlier by Lieutenant Governor is that people are against the policies of what they're doing in the states, but people are busy. They don't pay attention. I mean, I even think about my parents who read the New York Times cover to cover. They're like very aberrant in terms of their news consumption, but they don't know what's happening in their state and their local policies. And so I think the more that we are actually, and again, this goes back to the believability, like, we don't have to do that much work to show how extreme what the Republicans are doing in the states. We just have to talk about it and talk about it and talk about it, and in the context and venues where people will listen. And that's why it's been really exciting at this convention how many non-political content creators and non-political sort of leaders are here, because we know what the messages are that work. It's just like, the people we're talking about are not watching MSNBC and CNN and reading the New York Times, et cetera. And so, yeah. As much as we enjoy watching you on those shows.
They do.
So anyway, so I think there's the more that we draw that connective tissue between real things that have happened and the plans to make them worse, the better we will be.
So,
I think that I agreed. States like Florida and Texas are so damn big that the average voter has no clue what the state legislature is doing, right? People have gone there or lived there for various reasons, and they are not paying attention. It requires sort of something seismic to happen, and DeSantis is going to do this because he's a putz. He will make a mistake a la North Carolina when they did the bathroom bill. And the bathroom bill is such an interesting test case because the legislature, the government, they all thought they were in fine shape to do this. But business stood up and said, hold on, this is a business problem in the state. That DeSantis is going to do something like that. Greg Abbott is going to do something like that, where the people that they need, although I can't figure out what Republicans like anymore. They seem to hate corporations and love them. But that's what I think is going to happen when they're going to stand up and say, again, you can't pass that education mandate. You can't do that. Because in a state like Florida, that legislature, it's in Tallahassee. It's like foreign land. They don't even know what on earth is going on. But again, I do think these guys will trip up and go one step too far. And then the sort of proverbial powers that be are going to try to put a smack and say, like, let's bring things back to normalcy. And what America and what even our state wants.
Well, and just one example of that, seeing Senator Jones over there, is in Alabama, right? One step too far with IVF. Now, the senator has it's a red dot pin with a sea of blue around it. That's Alabama. Is the little, we gotta, get the opposite, bright blue dot in a red sea. But in those purpler states, when there is that bridge too far, which they are doing on even the issues like Kellyanne Conway's polling says don't talk about IVF, and they're out here talking about IVF in the states, right? So,
all right. So, you, Jeff, just raised something that has been on my mind. In the state of Florida, we have a governor who went after a major American corporation,
Yep.
a major part of his state,
Yes.
because he didn't like what they had to say. Where are the Republicans who are, maybe they consider themselves pro-business or libertarian, or do they find any affinity with Democrats on this, or are they so nervous about other issues with Democrats that they can't associate themselves with Democrats because of?
No, they do. It's hard for me to talk about what Republicans like and don't like, but I mean, what you have seen, like,
Or,
some of the
independents and moderate, kind of.
look, you've seen some of the backlash, and I mean, I think when you think that some of the most successful Republican governors in this country are Republican governors in blue states, because they have figured out, like, when you look numerically at who's sort of the top-ranking folks from a job approval perspective, it's somebody like a Charlie Baker before in Massachusetts, right? So you're governing in a state, and you're governing to the middle, and that's what those folks want. The problem for the Republicans is that there was a turnout in Arizona in the primary last week or the other day, whenever it was, and the turnout was just abysmal. I mean, nobody came out to vote. And Kari Lake, one of the biggest wackadoodles in the country, wins the primary, but actually wins it by a more narrow margin than I would have expected. So, like, I think there's going to be a backlash, even in these Republican primaries. In a low turnout Republican primary, Kari Lake should have won 90-10. The guy she was running against had no money, nothing. And so maybe there's a little bit of backlash even in the primaries until Republicans see penalty in the primaries. They're not going to do anything.
Yeah.
So, Yasmin, are you, so it could be Project 2025, it could be something else. What are you finding is the most persuasive, what are the couple most persuasive things that your canvassers and donors are focused on when they're having communication to persuade people to associate themselves with Democrats?
Abortion. I mean, it's just like, the only two topics that come up, like I said before, on every canvas are abortion and the economy. The economy is complicated, right? So the sophistication of the canvasser, their comfort level asking questions changes the dynamics, and the polling is also, I think the last polls I've seen, Jeff knows better than I, are about even, with Kamala a little bit ahead on the economy. But the reports we get back, I mean, they give me goosebumps from our canvassers about, purple Republican women. They see that, independent or Republican on their walk list. When they talk about abortion and they talk with specificity about what Trump's abortion bans are, what they mean, and they sort of draw the link between, because a lot of our conversations right now are with the down ballot Dems, that there's like no name ID in these districts for the down ballot Dem or Republican, but drawing that link between Trump's abortion bans and the Republican that's running, especially because a lot of these Republicans, when they sit on a panel with you on TV, they look real moderate, right? And they look like they are the Charlie Baker types. And when our canvassers are talking to them, talking to voters about either, if they're incumbents, how they voted on abortion, or what their buried former websites that they've now deleted have said on abortion, it's just one of my favorite surveys after a canvass. It was like a 5-paragraph thing that was supposed to be one sentence. And it was just, this canvasser was like, I've been knocking on doors since 2007. I have never seen anything like this. Like, people are just moving to our side in 2 minutes. Like, in a 2-minute conversation, they're like, I'm voting Democrat. And so, I know that we all know how important abortion is in this election. But I think because Kansas feels like a million years ago, the Dobbs decision feels like a million years ago, there's this question that I get asked all the time, which is like, but is it really going to still matter by November of 2024? And like, every single canvas confirms that not every voter is thinking about it every day, but as soon as they do, they're on our side.
So I'll give you one piece of political punditry, since I'm sitting here, and that's kind of what I do for a living now. The question about Vice President Harris and how she got here, obviously, other than the president being a hero and handing over the reins, you can't have the conversation about Kamala Harris that you've seen in the public in the last 4 weeks without talking about Dobbs.
Yeah, totally.
Because it was, if you look at her vice presidency, you can basically divide it in June of 2022 from the first part of her vice presidency to the second part. And what Dobbs did was it ordered the kind of messaging, talking points. I was in the vice president's office at the time, of the vice president. She talked about it all the time. Voters were interested in it. Frankly, the president had a troubled relationship with some of the language. So the vice president talked about it more forcefully on behalf of the White House. And I think her robust engagement on this question over the course of months really brought back the Kamala Harris that many people had seen earlier in her career that they were missing and wanted to see more of. And the confidence, and then you can make the argument that that helped Democrats stem the losses and win a seat, Senate seat in the fall. So it's hard, we think about these things in short-term bursts because things come at us so fast. We've had 3 or 4 earth-shattering developments in the campaign over the last, 6 months. But if you track it back, I think there is a progression that you've seen since Dobbs that matters. Jeff, you've seen this in data. Tell me.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think you were there. You were in the White House with the vice president, and you saw how she was. Particularly, she was talking on college campuses. She was going around talking about this, and she now gets to go back to any number of those places with a reservoir of goodwill of a real record here. And obviously, we know the president had a different relationship with the issue of abortion, very comfortable with the issue, not as comfortable talking about it, right? The vice president it couldn't be clearer on it. And so abortion is a very relevant, real, motivating factor. And the enthusiasm that we are seeing for Kamala Harris today, which nobody could have predicted, which isn't a knock on her, as you know, not she's my client. I'm not knocking her, right? But nobody could have predicted what has happened. I mean, what has happened in the last 4 weeks? We couldn't write it in a West Wing episode if we had tried. Like, there's no way. But the abortion thing has, Yasmin talked about in terms of the doors. Let's go to Arizona again. The abortion Dobbs decision comes down. We are instantly brought back to the 1960s, except in Arizona, where they actually are brought back to the 1860s, where an 1860s law comes into place. The Arizona state legislature, with a bunch of right-wing nut jobs running the place, sits on it because they're like, oh, yeah, that's okay. Yeah, why not? And it shows the kind of slowness of understanding the power of the problem for them. Eventually, they caught on the go. We better fix this thing. But it took a lot of pressure for them to do so. This is where I think Kamala Harris has such a huge opportunity to take it to Donald Trump. It is also why she, as a prosecutor, is such the right person to prosecute this case against Donald Trump. And specifically on the issue of abortion, she can talk about it. When she talks about it, people understand that she gets it. And I just think we couldn't talk about it enough, truthfully.
So Yasmin, basically Project 2025 wants to take the Dobbs decision and go harder, further, faster, and bring it to everyone. If you like the first one, it'll bring you another.
There's more.
Right, there's more. And you found that to be motivating, obviously, all indoors.
Absolutely. I just think the if the election were tomorrow, we've built the momentum, all the things. I think the question is, how do we keep talking about it and keep people's attention focused? And so I think that's the challenge before us, is not, do we need to persuade anyone of the issue? Do we need to get creative? It's just keep talking, and making sure that people are listening. And then I think the last thing that I'll say is, we're talking about the top of the ticket because it really matters. But drawing the connective tissue between Project 2025 and what the different levers of government mean, right? So like something that is really animating for Swing Left was founded to flip the House. So like there is a comfort in talking about what the House means as a line of defense in the God forbid, chance that Donald Trump wins. But talking about Project 2025 through the lens of the confirmations of the cabinet positions, not just in the judiciary, but the cabinet positions of the people who are going to supercharge Project 2025 is a big part of what's also helping people to understand like, what does it mean to care about a Senate race, right? Like, for people who are not thinking that much about it, it's, okay, I get Donald Trump is dangerous. Here's why the Senate is dangerous if it's in Republican hands. And then, of course, we need the backup of the House, too.
So, Jeff, I want to leave us with this. You gave us some basic language when we started about what to remind people of. If you can give us the language again, and maybe 2 or 3, the things you think are the most important things for people to remember when they're having these conversations with their middle-aged, hairdressing, nail tech relatives.
Totally. Understood. We won't tell her you said middle-aged. I'm sure she will like that.
As my dad said to me when I turned 40, how old exactly do you think you're going to be?
I want to remind you, Project 2025 is, and you choose your word, but takeover, a plot, an agenda. A plot is nefarious, right? It's something truly evil. An agenda is a clearly written, documented thing where they're putting it out, right? Those are the words that I tend to like to talk about Project 2025. And it threatens our rights and freedoms. Maybe that's too much. Maybe that's too esoteric for some people. So what I would say is it hurts the middle class, because I think that's to go back to what you said, and of course is economic. Led by Donald Trump and MAGA extremists. Let's put it on Trump and his many minions, because they are dangerous, power-hungry, and extreme. This is the one you saw an article. Some of you may have seen an article about this. I love talking about these guys as weird because it's fun and funny and gets people laughing. And I love that our next vice president sort of leaned into that. But the one thing I want to be clear is, when I have a choice between voting for the weird guy and maybe somebody who I think is like a crazy lefty because they're going to spend $1 billion saying she's a lunatic, I might vote for the weird guy, right? But I don't want to vote for the dangerous guy, the guy who's that extreme that is going to be a problem. And so this needs to be brought in a very real, tangible way to people. And Project 2025 is that thing that allows us to do it.
All right. Thank you, too, for being here.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Thanks.
Thank you all.
Navin?
That's it.
Joe?
Poster. Thank you all very, very much. Thank you, Jamal. Thank you, Jeff. Thank you, Yasmin. Great. Well, the first time I heard about Project 2025 was early March outside of Harrisburg at a focus group where we were starting to think about what would activate people, what would elevate people's concerns. And I think we've sort of been able to break down in this conversation not only what we're trying to get to, because we want to always be delivering some contrast, but also why they want to do this takeover. Senator Murphy was able to cover that, right? These are very unpopular things. So the only way to do it is to enact this agenda, take on this plot, etc. So we know why, because they couldn't do it any other way. We know how. They want to fire the civil service. They want to privatize these government functions. They continue to capture the court. And so we've kind of answered these questions of why they want to do that, how they're going to do it, and being able to package that up for people can actually break through some of the concerns about, could they really do this in a way that a lot of other things we've tried before haven't been able to do. It takes the democracy threat and it puts it into the future, and it's also a really short way to describe all they want to do, and it begs the question, well, what do you want to do? What's the future that the other side wants? And with this ticket, now we think we have a great answer to that question. So I think we have our marching orders. Thank you all for being here, and enjoy the rest of the night.